Hello, hello. It is DeeDee Catron here today for StencilGirl Products and StencilSchool. I am going to be walking you through creating a needle book. I really needed one in my own stash, and I thought, what a perfect opportunity. So let's get started. I have a stack of fibers and fabrics here. This is a piece of linen that I picked up at a thrift store. This is also a piece of linen that has been previously dyed. I have some sari ribbon. I have a piece of felt. This is a piece of muslin, 100% cotton, that was used to just sop up some paint, so upcycling. This is something I've had in my stash for a while. I've been trying to find a place for it. It was an image transfer that I demoed on fabric. And then I have my stencils from StencilGirl here. I knew right away that I really wanted to use this celestial one. It just feels like it has a great connection with the backed image transfer that is going to be the cover of my book. So I'm going to walk you through creating this, and I hope that you maybe learn some tips and tricks. The first thing that I'm going to do, and I do have some varied speeds going on this video just to get us through some of the more sort of boring and humdrum areas. And you may see the lighting change a little bit. I filmed this over a couple days. But I have a big wool mat, an ironing mat, and my iron set to the cotton and linen setting. And I'm going to iron out all my fabrics. I don't always do this. A lot of times my fabrics are very crinkly and wrinkled. That I appreciate and enjoy that aspect in my artwork. However, if I'm going to do some sewing or, some maybe more particular stitching of any kind, I do like to have the fabric straighter and ironed out so that I can measure them more accurately. Not that I come away with, garments that will ever necessarily be for sale, but I did want my needle book to be secure, to be stitched well. I want it to last a long time. So I did go ahead and iron out those fabrics. All right, and so here are all of those, a bit flatter. And then the next step is to trim these down now that I've flattened them so that they are much easier during the cutting process, is to measure and trim down everything so that it lays how I want it to. And part of that is that I don't in my particular needle book want a bunch of excess fabrics hanging out the edge, which if you're familiar with my artwork, you're gonna be like, that doesn't make any sense for you. But I was just looking to have like a little bit neater, maybe nicer needle book. Not nicer, just neater. Neater is the better word. And so I am trimming. You'll notice that the image transfer, again, just from my stash, just something I've had hanging around, is the cover of my needle book, and it's going to be bigger than all the other fabrics that I'm working with. So I've cut this felt. I have some, and I do want to say it's craft felt, so it's not felted wool. So it does melt under an iron. So please pay attention to that in my video when I get there. But I trimmed it down to be about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch, smaller on all sides than the cover. And same with the muslin. And again, this muslin is from my stash. I used it when I was working on a previous project to sop up some excess paint. I'm a huge, huge advocate of use what you have and upcycle, reuse, breathe new life into old goods. And so I tend to use fabrics and fibers when I'm painting to soak up excess moisture, and then I have them to use in my artwork later. So I do have that piece of muslin out, and I mean, the nickel azo gold is just delightful. So I definitely never want to waste that, which is the color that's on the muslin. And it is dry, so it's acrylic, and it took a long time to dry. Set that to the side. at that time, again, it's from my stash, so I just pulled some things that I had hanging out. And I'm using the Catron's Orbit stencil and a pencil to transfer portions of the stencil that I love the most, or I only have so much room on this little piece of fabric. So I'm putting down the imagery from the stencil that makes sense and looks good aesthetically. I've got the great big radiating sort of solar system image in the top left, the phases of the moon in the bottom right, and then on the top right, another version of the phases of the moon. And I have some embroidery floss here or crochet cotton, either will work. And a fairly sharp, short needle. And I'm going to walk you through a few of my favorite stitches. So once I've got this bad boy transferred, the stencil transferred onto the fabric, I can come in or am coming in and hand stitching. The first little stitch that I'm going to do is a French knot. I love these so much. I have to put a knot in the thread underneath, which I don't always do, so that I have some resistance. And then my needle goes under the thread towards my body, towards me, under, and wraps around. And I do that a couple times. And then the needle goes back through the knot, back through this now little sort of fibery knot that I have on the needle. And with my thumb, I hold the loose part of the thread on the left tight or taut. And then I push the needle through the fabric, pull out the back side, and while continuing to hold the left part taut, I pull the thread, and then now I've created a little French knot. The next stitch that I'm doing is it's like a back stitch when you're hand stitching. And so because I wanted a solid line, not a broken dotted line. So the first stitch on that is normal. Come up from the underside of the fabric, over and down. But then on your second stitch, when you come up from the underside of the fabric, you actually go back instead of forward. And you can see it here demoed a couple times. And this is actually filling in the gap that would come from a stitch if you were just like normal sort of stitching. You know, you have a little dash and then a space, a dash and a space. I'm working backwards on top and forwards on the bottom of the fabric to fill in those spots. And this really sort of emphasizes the stencil graphic that I've created and helps that imagery sort of stay true to itself. Very solid line, very orbity, kind of mapping those orbits of the different planets around the sun, which the French knot is our sun. And I'm gonna show you, I did skip a little bit just because there's a lot of hand stitching and I filmed all of it and it was really quite a bit boring. Oh, and then here I wanted you to see I had gotten a little taut with my fabric, and because my stitching it was continuous, which also sometimes I have a very long thread to stitch with. Don't do that to yourself. It's just fine to add more thread or start your thread over. I create a lot of knots when my thread is too long, which you saw me earlier correct that also. And here, really quickly, here you can see how that back stitch works. Instead of going forward, you come back and flip that around, and then your new stitch, it starts underneath. But I wanted to say because I had a really long piece of thread and my fabric had become bunched in one area, I was able to snip a little bit of the thread on the back and my fabric flattened back out where I had gone from one stitch to the next. And I do want to show the planets here. They're very cool, and they've just got some little cross stitches, but I'll show you that a little bit better in just a moment. Firstly, after the orbit is done, well, secondly, I guess, because firstly, the orbit is done. Secondly, I'm going to do the phases of the moon in the bottom right-hand corner. And they are a third stitch. And it's a very sort of long, straight stitch. And you'll see right here, so I come in and I go directly across in one long stitch. And then I'm going to continue to do that as I fill in this phase of the moon and just make the stitches the appropriate length to create myself like a little circle. And they can be as close together or as far apart as you want. You can go for different styles that way. And I did want it to look like they were still little individual stitches. So they're kind of a medium length apart, I would say. And then here, when I'm working on the lines between the phases of the moon, I'm actually doing the dotted stitch that I had mentioned previously. And I think people will call it a running stitch is what it is. But it's the stitch where there's space between the stitches. So it's those spaces that I was avoiding previously. And now I want to utilize that so that this part of the hand embroidered or, hand stitched stencil just has some variety and looks different and some interest to it than the previous one. And filling in that phase of the moon. And it's going to speed up here in just a second. So you don't have to sit through the whole thing. And you can see my thread's getting very short. It's all right. I'll just pull it out in the back and rethread the needle with a new piece and keep going. I mentioned previously that I'm using, it's a huge ball of it. And so sometimes the wrapper falls off, but it's either embroidery floss or cotton pearl crochet thread. But that's just my choice for this particular project. You could use metallic threads or variegated things. You could do a similar process with yarn, like chunky yarn would be cool and give you a whole different vibe. So, you don't ever have to use, of course, exactly what I'm using and sharing, but never hesitate to experiment, I guess is what I'm getting at. I'm going to have to try this with like a nice big chunky yarn or some hand spun yarn or some art yarn. Like there's so many options out there. T-shirt yarn, lots of fun things to play with. This part, so you saw me come back. I did fast forward again a little bit there so you didn't have to watch the whole thing. But now for these phases of the moon, I started with some tiny little seed stitches on the end. And then as this graphic has gotten larger, so again, this is another version of the phases of the moon, but it's in a very circular pattern as the waxing and waning moons change to full moon and new moon. And so as it comes around and the areas or the moon needs to get larger because more of it is visible, I'm adding extra little seed stitches. And so seed stitches are just like really tiny stitches that are used to fill in something. And in this case, I might put some of them next to each other, or I might put some of them across each other in a little X pattern or a little plus sign pattern or like a little asterisk, like a 6-pointed star, just so that it's thicker or wider or bigger in the areas that it needs to be without being difficult. And I will always say this, you'll always hear me say this, like variety is key, especially when we're working on a piece like this or working in artwork. And so I've got quite a few different stitches going on this piece that create context and contrast and visual interest. So I've done some back stitching. There are a couple French knots on the solar system image. There is some straight stitching, the running stitch, some seed stitches, some cross stitches. And so, yeah, just sort of experiment and have fun. And you can do this with any stencil. I chose Catron's Orbit. One, it's my stencil. And two, I really felt like it lent itself to the bat imagery, celestial, sky, upwards type feel. And so, yeah, like, think about all StencilGirl has face stencils and landscape stencils and abstract stencils and shape stencils and word stencils. I mean, all of it would be so cool. And you just need a number 2 pencil, and you draw lightly through the stencil onto your fabric, and then you follow the stencil designs with some stitching and with thread and a needle. So it's really, really great, and I actually really enjoy it. Yeah. Oh, okay. And so then here now on the back, I do have some loose threads, either from switching thread to a new piece, or sometimes I didn't pull taut enough, and then I just have some loose little bits back here. So instead of pulling out and redoing the whole thing, I'm just using a really thin layer of Fabri-Tac on the back. And you'll see I apply it to my finger first so that then I can smear it onto the threads. And it's kind of like when you are hooking a rug or something. It's just a really thin layer to hold those fibers and threads in place. And now I'm going to start putting things together. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I need to iron again. I'm going to stitch it together, or actually I'm going to show you a little bit of a trick, but I'm going to put it together. And I just want some of those areas and pieces to be straight, to be nice and flat and not hinder myself. I swear, you got to work for yourself, not against yourself. And I do really love a nice piece of crinkly fabric. But for the next parts of the process, it's going to be best if it's nice and flat. And I am ironing between 2 layers of parchment paper because I did just apply some glue to that piece. And so there's a chance that it will get warm and melt a little bit, and I don't want that to get on my iron. So, but I'm also being very quick and hoping not to reactivate that glue on the backside, which somehow I lucked out because I did not think very far ahead in that particular part of the process. I should have ironed before I glued. All right, and I'm just gonna tack everything here, make sure that it lines up how I had originally intended. I'm working on a little trifold book here because I want to put 2 little pamphlet books like inside, so you can see that here. I'm going to cut some of this felt down to size to have little books inside that I can push my needles into, and pins and whatever else I might need. And I'm eyeballing it. I don't have a measuring tape or a ruler of any kind out. I'm just trying to straighten it up nice and neat. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it also, doesn't need to be super wonky. The thing about this particular piece is I want it to close and go into my travel bag when I'm out and about doing events. So I want it to be a little bit neater and nicer. I know it sounds so funny that I keep saying that, but sometimes also when I'm working with fibers and fabrics and such, sewing, it feels like I need to be a little more restrained maybe. And because I know that I want 2 books, I am using the first one to make the second one. And everything's looking really good. They're not going to stay stacked like that, but I was just feeling it out. There we go. And I love, too, the different little hints of the stencil in the background that you get. And it's such a nice detail on the inside when you open it up. All right, so I'm grabbing more of my thread and my needle, and I'm going to pamphlet stitch these in. But at this point in the process, I realized I got ahead of myself, and I want to put a little cover on each little pamphlet, and I want to create a pocket. So I'm just about to stitch these in, and then I go, whoa, 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 whoa. So you're going to see a little jump in the video here, but it's all for good. Because I realized I wanted to do a couple more things before I really started stitching stuff down. So here we are. Again, little clip in the video, but I have this really great linen, and I kind of mentioned it at the beginning when I was showing you the stack of supplies. But I found this at a thrift store, and there were 4 of these like gray colored linen napkins in a package for $1. Or even maybe $1.99, so $1 or $2. But I was like, man, this is really, really lovely. And I couldn't see the tag, but on the actual napkin, but the bag itself said linen. So I took a chance. It was $2, and it's 100% linen. So it's got this really great weave to it, this really great texture. The color is stunning. And so I'm working on making a pocket that goes in the middle between my 2 little miniature pamphlet stitched books. And I'm just measuring it out, seeing how it all fits together. And then this is that beautiful yellow linen that I want to wrap the outside of the felt with. And it is just not quite large enough to wrap all the way around both, but I'm going with it because I feel like it'll be just fine. And using one to measure the other, I'm going by eyeball, so it's kind of specific, but also still very true to my haphazard ways of creating. And yes, I'm going to iron that edge because I'm going to stitch them together. So just like when you crease paper to make pamphlets that then you stitch into a signature, I'm doing very similar here. It is important that I note really quickly, again, my felt is like it was a huge bolt of like craft felt, not felted wool. And so it does have some polyester in it. And when you iron it, it gets kind of hard. So just go very lightly if you're going to be doing that. I stitched my pocket on with a sewing machine, and I'm not doing too much sewing here, I promise. But I wanted that to have a nice secure edge so that I can tuck little things into it. And then I made the pocket where the pocket is stitched on the machine is where I want to stitch in my little pamphlets. So I've layered up the felt with the mustard colored linen, and I'm going to pamphlet stitch these in. So it's 1 hole in the middle, and then I didn't measure anything. I'm just going for it. 1 hole at the top. So then you're going to bypass the middle for a hole at the bottom and come back in the middle. And you should use the same hole. That's sort of the idea. But then you have 1 string on the left and 1 string on the right of the bypass string, and you knot. And it's like the simplest bookmaking stitch. It's my favorite. I designed a whole product based on it. And it's really great. The results are fantastic. There I go with extra long thread again. I always struggle when my threads are too long. And so just snip it. It's fine. There's more thread, and hold on to those little snippets of thread because you can use them in lots of other ways. Which I love to do. So don't be afraid that you're wasting thread. Just hold on to them and use them for other things. You can fill puffy pieces with them. You can stitch them into art yarn. You can capture them in little nets. Lots of cool things. Also, make sure you're stitching straight. I did have to straighten out my second little pamphlet here. But again, through the middle, This time I went to the bottom instead of the top. It doesn't matter as long as you bypass that middle hole when you come back for the second, and then through, thread on either side, and knot. And now I've got 2 miniature books inside my needle book. And because I ironed them, including that felt, but make sure you're ironing it, the felt between parchment paper and just quickly, otherwise it'll melt together. They're nice and secure, but also they close and they open and they move in there. They're not stiff. And I just keep checking everything to make sure it's looking like I want it to look. I want it to lay a certain way. I want it to fold a certain way. I want it to be secure. It's going to hold all my needles, and they're sharp. And if they get all over, it's not good news. Especially if I'm traveling. All right. Can you tell I'm hesitant to start gluing everything down? I must have tried it out 100 times to make sure I had it where I wanted it. All right, and one final step before adhering or gluing or stitching, however it's going to come together, and I'm going to show you how I do it, but I need a closure. It needs to be held closed. Again, we're trying to be secure here and make sure that my needles can travel with me safely. And so we want it to be held closed. So I have these 2 different types of sari. Well, I mean, they're both sari, but one is solid black, which I got from Kristen Peterson, actually. And then the one that's cream colored with the black polka dots I got from Tina Walker, who are both Stencil Girl designers. And I couldn't decide between one or the other. I was kind of struggling with it, kind of checking stuff out, trying to debate. And in the end, awesomely, I think, I used both. So I did a little, before that, I did a little bit of stitching at the sewing machine to give my cover a nice border. I felt like it was lacking that when I was testing it out. And then as I came back, and I'm hesitating is what I'm doing. I'm stalling, but I really did like stitching that border around the edge. It's a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. But it also gave me time to contemplate a little bit, and I decided I'm going to use a piece of both of these. So I've trimmed them to the same size. I have knotted one end, and then I sewed the other end to the felt so that it is very sturdy and strong, and I don't have to worry about ripping it out. I'm testing again one more time. And then here is how I'm going to put this bad boy together. So this is Stitch Witchery. It's like a web tape that is glue, and it's heat activated. And it's awesome. So a lot of times they use it for like hemming or just like fixing small areas. But we're going to use it to put our whole little book together. And I pull it off the roll. It doesn't even have a backing or anything. It's not sticky. It's just like unactivated glue. And then when you heat it with an iron or some other, like a press or even like a heat gun, the glue melts and glues together your layers, whatever's on the top and the bottom. They do make fusible interfacing that you could replace the felt with that would do something very similar, but I was looking for a little bit more control, I think. So the first thing I did was I put a layer all the way around the outside of the cover, and then I put the felt down, and I tucked it between parchment paper, and I'm using my iron on the hottest setting, so the cotton linen setting, and then I'm going around very slowly and applying heat and pressure to where I've laid that stitch witchery. And it's like the glue tape. And I'm not ironing on the felt side because remember, my felt is like a craft felt and it has that polyester in it, and I don't want the felt to get stiff. And if I add heat to it, it will melt and get stiff. And I just keep checking. You've seen me check 2 or 3 times now to make sure that I'm activating that stitch witchery well enough. But I was ironing on the cover side. And similarly, I will now lay stitch witchery across the inside again on top of the felt this time. That part doesn't matter where it goes. Laying across, and I'm going to put, yep, my backing, my hand stitched backing or the inside layer. And this time I'm not going to worry about putting the parchment paper underneath, but I'm going to lay it on top and iron everywhere I can get my iron onto that piece of muslin. And I'm going to move the books, the little pamphlet needle books, out of the way so that I can apply more heat, better pressure anywhere in there that I can. Because I want to activate as much of that glue as possible, that stitch witchery that's all the way across there, and not mess with the felt if possible. Just like this. And I've managed to hit like all of the main areas where that glue is, and I'm feeling really confident about it. But when you're doing it, don't, like, you can pull away and pull your iron back and just tug on your layers to make sure that you're activating that, like this. There you go. To make sure you're activating the adhesive well enough. And now I have these 3 layers of fabric that are all stuck together, and I could have, but didn't have to, machine stitch it together or hand stitch it together. But here it is. I'm so happy with it, and I'm so excited. And you'll see me poke a couple needles through some of the areas. And I have needles of all different sizes. So I've got some nice little stitchy ones. Excuse me. I've got some larger like tapestry ones or weaving needles. And because those are larger and not as pointy, they're not going to go through the felt. Oh, and then also one of the reasons I wanted the felt between the layers of fabric was so that I could stick needles in the back too. You know, that felt is really great for holding your needles, and with the layer of felt between my cover and my inside, I can put them in the back. But my tapestry needles and my weaving needles, they need a place to rest. And so I'm cutting a piece of cardboard just to slide down into my pocket to put my needles in. However, I have been living with this case for this little book for a couple of days, and I don't love the piece of cardboard in there. I'm going to put like a piece of foam that my needles can stick into. But here you go. It's got safety pins, needles, a threader. I can put a seam ripper in there, maybe a small pair of scissors, and a book of needles if I want. And there we have it. So here are some final photos. Please just let me know if I was unclear about anything. You can find me on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook at DeeDee Catron, and I'll answer any questions you have. And thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to be here on the Stencil Girl YouTube channel. And yeah, I'll see you guys around. And I can't wait to see if you make any hand embroidered stencils and or needle books.